Have you ever witnessed someone go from the highest of highs to the lowest of lows in a matter of seconds? Imagine this: you're standing there in a bustling office, surrounded by colleagues, when suddenly, your boss storms in and delivers a public blow. You're fired. The shock, the confusion, the disbelief, and in front of everyone. What would you do in that moment? How would you feel, knowing your professional reputation was just shattered in an instant? Now, here's the twist. Within hours, another company, a rival no less, swoops in and hires you on the spot. Can you even begin to imagine what would go through your mind? The emotions, the thoughts racing through your head. How did this happen? Why did this happen? What does it all mean? And what's the catch? In today's story, you're going to get the answers to these burning questions. I promise you, by the time you finish watching this video, you'll be hanging on to every word, questioning what you thought you knew about career success, loyalty, and how far a single decision can shift the course of someone's life. This is not just a story about getting fired, it's about what happens when life throws a curveball and you're forced to play a game you never saw coming. Now, I know what you're thinking. What is this story really about? How does someone get fired in front of their colleagues and, within moments, be snapped up by a competitor? The events that unfold next are like nothing you've seen before. Trust me, you'll want to stick around till the very end to understand the twists and turns in this incredible tale. Let me introduce you to Sarah. She had been with her company for nearly a decade. She was driven, talented, and known for her ability to turn around failing projects with ease. People admired her work ethic, and her boss, Terry, had always praised her dedication. She was at the top of her game, the golden child in the office. Everyone thought her career was set. She had just been given a promotion, and things seemed to be moving in the right direction. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it, doesn't it? One fateful afternoon, Sarah walked into work, expecting another regular day. Little did she know, everything was about to change. She sat at her desk, logged into her computer, and began preparing for a meeting she had scheduled with her team. But just before she could even open her presentation, she received a message. It was from Terry, the one person she trusted most in the office. "Sarah, I need you in my office, now," it read. Confused but not thinking much of it, Sarah grabbed her notes and walked toward Terry's office. She didn't know this would be the moment her entire career would be thrown into chaos. As she entered the room, Terry was standing there, flanked by a couple of HR representatives. Before Sarah could even get a word in, Terry coldly announced, "Sarah, we're letting you go. Effective immediately. In front of everyone. No warning. No real explanation. Just a public firing, right in the middle of the office, as if she was just another expendable cog in the machine." The weight of the words hit her hard. It was as if the floor had dropped out from beneath her. Her colleagues, who had been working next to her just moments ago, now turned their heads in shock and disbelief. Sarah was too stunned to speak. All she could do was gather her things and leave, trying her best to hold it together as the eyes of her co-workers followed her every move. The humiliation was overwhelming. But here's where it gets interesting. Just hours later, as Sarah was walking out of her apartment, still processing the shock of the morning, her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. She hesitated, but then picked it up. What she heard next would change everything. A voice on the other end asked, "Is this Sarah? We saw what happened today, and we'd love to offer you a job. Immediate hire, with an even better position and pay." How did it all happen so fast? How did a company that once seemed like a distant competitor know so much about Sarah? And why was she being offered a job just hours after being humiliated in front of her entire office? The connection between Sarah's firing and the instant offer from the rival company wasn't immediately clear, but it would soon unravel in ways that no one could have predicted. You might be wondering, why would anyone want to hire someone who was just let go? Isn't there a stigma attached to being fired? Wouldn't it make sense to assume Sarah's departure from her previous company was due to incompetence or failure? But here's the thing: appearances can be deceiving. The truth is often more complicated than it seems, and Sarah's story is no exception. As the days went on, Sarah began to piece together what had happened. She started to realize that there was much more to the story than just a random firing. Something bigger was at play, something far more intricate than simple office politics or miscommunication. There were hidden motives at work, and the more Sarah dug, the more she uncovered. But just as she thought she was beginning to understand the forces behind her sudden fall from grace, new information came to light, throwing everything she thought she knew into question. The rival company that had hired her wasn't just offering her a new job. No, they were offering her a chance to expose a corporate conspiracy that reached far beyond the walls of her old company. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's rewind for a moment. Before Sarah could even begin to process her new reality, she found herself thrust into a high-stakes world of corporate intrigue, secret deals, and betrayal. And while the rival company might have seemed like a lifeline, it quickly became clear that they weren't just offering her a job, they had their own reasons for wanting Sarah on their team. And if she wasn't careful, she could end up becoming a pawn in a much larger game. One false move, and everything she had worked for could slip through her fingers faster than she could blink. As Sarah settled into her new role, she began to work closely with her new colleagues at the rival company, learning more about their business practices and the web of corporate politics that had led to her unexpected hiring. She soon discovered that her firing wasn't just about her performance, it was about something far darker. A rival company had been planning a hostile takeover of her former workplace, and her firing was part of a carefully orchestrated move to weaken her company from within. But here's the kicker: Sarah was the key to unlocking the future of both companies, and she didn't even realize it. What started as an unfortunate dismissal had turned into a life-altering opportunity to take down the very corporation that had once been her biggest ally. And now, as Sarah stands at the crossroads of this corporate battle, the question remains: will she remain loyal to her old colleagues, or will she use her new position to tear down the empire that betrayed her? The stakes have never been higher. The power plays have never been more dangerous. And the twists and turns are only just beginning. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Keep watching, because the answers you've been waiting for are coming, and you'll be left wondering how one decision, one unexpected move, can change everything. Will Sarah rise to the challenge? Will she uncover the hidden truth that could destroy everything? Or will she find herself entangled in a game much larger than she ever anticipated? You'll have to stick around to find out. Don't go anywhere, because the real drama is only just beginning. As Sarah sat at her new desk at the rival company, the hum of the office around her felt strangely surreal. The reality of being fired and immediately hired by a competitor still hadn't fully sunk in, and she was having trouble adjusting to the shift in her daily routine. The shock of the morning's events was still fresh, her emotions still raw. But she couldn't afford to waste time dwelling on the past. This was a new chapter, and if she was going to make it through this unscathed, she needed to hit the ground running. Her first few days at the new company were a blur of introductions and onboarding processes. The place was a lot more high-tech and fast-paced than her old office, but there was something about it that felt off. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but the energy in the air was charged with something unspoken, something hidden beneath the surface. People were friendly, even overly so at times, but there was always a certain level of guardedness in their eyes. No one was giving anything away. Every conversation seemed to have a double meaning, as if everyone knew more than they were letting on. It wasn't just the atmosphere that unsettled her. As Sarah began to settle into her role, she couldn't help but notice the subtle tension between the employees at the rival company. It wasn't obvious at first, but as the days went by, the cracks began to show. People seemed to be walking on eggshells around certain individuals, avoiding eye contact or quickly changing the subject whenever specific topics were brought up. She caught whispers in the hallways, hushed conversations that would stop as soon as she walked by. And then there was Daniel. Daniel was one of the first people to welcome Sarah when she arrived. He was charismatic, smart, and seemed genuinely interested in making sure she felt comfortable in the new environment. He even offered to take her out for lunch on her first day, a gesture that felt oddly calculated but kind nonetheless. At first, Sarah appreciated the attention. It was a big change, and having someone so willing to show her the ropes was a relief. But the more she got to know him, the more she began to wonder about his intentions. There was something about the way he looked at her, something almost predatory. It wasn't overt, but Sarah noticed it in the way his eyes lingered a bit too long, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. She couldn't help but feel like he was sizing her up, and not in the friendly, welcoming way that she had initially thought. But Daniel wasn't the only one making her uneasy. There was also Claire, a senior executive who had a reputation for being tough but fair. On paper, she seemed like the perfect role model for someone just stepping into a new company, and Sarah had heard plenty of glowing reports about her leadership. However, when Sarah observed Claire's interactions with others, she saw a different side. The sharp, calculated way she spoke to her team was unnerving. She had a way of getting what she wanted without ever raising her voice, without ever showing any sign of exerting power. It was subtle but unmistakable. And whenever Sarah was around, Claire always had a peculiar way of steering the conversation back to her old company, speaking with a knowing tone as if she had been intimately involved in Sarah's firing. But why? Why was she so invested in the details of Sarah's past? The pieces weren't adding up. There was something about this whole situation that felt staged, orchestrated even. Why had this rival company offered her a position so quickly? They hadn't just seen her as a skilled employee. It felt like they knew something about her, something deep and personal, something she didn't even know herself. It didn't make sense. The firing was public, yes, but it wasn't the kind of thing that would cause a major company to rush to poach an employee. Not unless they were after something more than just her skill set. It was the strange conversations that kept gnawing at Sarah. For example, during one of her lunches with Daniel, he casually mentioned how lucky she was to be at this company. "You know," he had said, stirring his coffee with a little too much enthusiasm, "I heard they've been looking for someone with your particular expertise for a while. They've been eyeing you for months. They knew you were coming." He said it with such conviction that Sarah almost believed him. But then she stopped herself. Months? How could they have known months ago? She hadn't even been on the radar of this company until the morning she was fired. That couldn't be right. Could it? Claire, on the other hand, had an entirely different approach. In their first one-on-one meeting, she had made a passing comment that seemed completely unrelated to Sarah's role. "You know, sometimes things don't happen by accident," she said cryptically, her eyes narrowing just a fraction. "Everything happens for a reason, even if it takes a while to understand why." At the time, Sarah had brushed it off as another one of Claire's mysterious leadership sayings, but now, as she pieced the events together, it was starting to feel like Claire knew more than she let on. What was going on here? Why did these people seem to be hinting at things that Sarah couldn't quite grasp? Why were they acting like they knew what had happened, even though no one should have known about her firing until it hit the news? There was something deeply unsettling about the way they all seemed to be circling her, as if she were the final piece of a puzzle they had been trying to solve for a long time. But the real question was, what kind of game were they playing? The more Sarah thought about it, the more she realized that her firing wasn't a random event. It wasn't just about her performance. It was about something bigger, something strategic. It was about power, about taking down a rival. The rival company's sudden interest in her wasn't just a stroke of luck, it was a calculated move. But why? Was she just a pawn in a much larger corporate war? Or was there a deeper personal motive at play? As the days passed, Sarah became more aware of the dynamics at play within the company. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she wasn't being told. Everyone was being nice, but there was a distance in their eyes, a distance that seemed to say they knew something she didn't. And just when Sarah thought she might be getting closer to understanding, an unexpected visit from an old colleague from her previous company made everything even more complicated. As she opened the door to her office one afternoon, she found Emily standing there, looking like she had just stepped out of a nightmare. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "We need to talk," Emily whispered urgently, glancing around as if she were being watched. What did Emily know? What had happened since Sarah's departure? Why was she here now? The mystery was deepening. And with every answer Sarah thought she was uncovering, more questions were emerging, pulling her further into a web of deception, intrigue, and corporate espionage. Could Sarah trust anyone in this new company? Or was she simply another pawn in a much larger game she didn't fully understand yet? Whatever the truth was, it was just beginning to surface, and Sarah knew she had to figure it out before it was too late. But time was running out, and the deeper she dug, the more dangerous things became. The following week, Sarah's sense of unease only deepened. The mysterious tension she'd noticed between her colleagues at the rival company was escalating, and the whispers in the hallways had become more frequent. Every corner seemed to hold a new clue, a new piece of the puzzle that could shed light on the strange circumstances surrounding her firing and her sudden hire. But every time she felt like she was getting closer to the truth, something would throw her off track, a new obstacle would appear to make things even more confusing. She had no idea who she could trust anymore. The further she dug, the more walls seemed to close in around her. It started with an email. A seemingly innocuous message from her old company, an automated update about her severance pay and benefits. Nothing out of the ordinary, except for one tiny detail. It included a brief list of documents she could request for her records, things like performance reviews and exit interviews. Something about that list caught her attention. One document stood out in particular, a report that she had never seen before, one that seemed to have been filed just days before her dismissal. It was labeled Internal Audit, Air Personnel Review, Sarah Williams. The moment Sarah saw it, her instincts went into overdrive. She immediately clicked on the link to download the document. But to her horror, the file was gone. A message popped up on her screen: "This document is no longer available." She sat there for a moment, staring at the blank screen. The file had been there just a minute ago. Could it have been an error? Maybe it was just a technical glitch. But deep down, Sarah knew that wasn't the case. Someone had erased that file. But who? And why? The disappearance of that document left Sarah rattled. She knew that it contained something important, some key piece of information that could explain everything: the firing, the strange offer from the rival company, the odd behavior of her new colleagues. But now, it was gone, as if it had never existed. This wasn't just a coincidence. Someone was trying to keep her from uncovering the truth, and they were going to great lengths to make sure she didn't find out what was really going on. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the stakes were much higher than she'd originally thought. Her old company wasn't just letting her go, they were actively trying to erase any trace of her involvement in whatever scheme was unfolding. But why? She tried to focus on her work, hoping that the answers would come to her. But it was impossible to ignore the feeling that she was being watched. Everywhere she went, she felt eyes on her, like someone was always a step ahead, waiting for her to slip up. She found herself second-guessing every conversation, every interaction, wondering if she was being manipulated. And then, there was Daniel. Daniel had continued to be unusually attentive, almost too much so. He'd been kind, offering advice, guiding her through company procedures, but his behavior was starting to feel more like surveillance than friendship. At first, Sarah had chalked it up to his natural charisma, but now, she wasn't so sure. Every time they spoke, he seemed to know just a little too much about her. When they met up for coffee, he casually mentioned, "You know, I've been hearing some things around here. People are talking about your old company. It's not exactly a clean break, is it?" His tone was light, almost playful, but the weight behind his words was unmistakable. He was trying to prod her, to see what she knew, and to what extent she was willing to dig into the mess that had become her life. Sarah had to be careful. Daniel was either a friend or an enemy, and at this point, she wasn't sure which. The tension only escalated when, one evening, Sarah was going through some old files on her laptop, hoping to find some clues she might have missed. She came across an encrypted folder that she didn't recognize. It had no name, no indication of what it contained, just a series of random numbers and letters as the file title. Sarah hesitated for a moment, wondering if it was some kind of mistake. But something told her to open it, to see what was hidden inside. She tried to unlock the folder with every password she could think of, but it wouldn't budge. Frustrated, she decided to ask for help from someone in IT. But when she went to the IT department the next morning, she was met with an unexpected response. "Sorry, we don't have any record of that folder on your system," the technician said, scrolling through the file directories on her laptop. "There's nothing here." Sarah felt a cold chill run through her. The folder had been there the night before, and now it was gone. Another trace, another piece of the puzzle, wiped clean. Someone was going to extreme lengths to cover their tracks, and Sarah was starting to realize just how deep this conspiracy ran. That afternoon, things took an even darker turn. Emily, the colleague from her old company, had reached out to her again. This time, though, she wasn't standing in front of Sarah's office, looking pale and terrified. No, this time, Emily called her, her voice shaking with urgency. "Sarah, you need to stop," she pleaded. "I don't know how they found out, but you're in too deep. They know you're asking questions, and it's not safe for you to keep digging. You don't understand what you're dealing with. This is bigger than you think. If you keep going, you're going to end up just like the others." Sarah's heart raced. What did Emily mean by the others? Who was she referring to? And why was Emily so scared? There was something in her voice, a desperation that wasn't just about protecting herself. It was as if Emily knew exactly what could happen to Sarah if she didn't back off, but wasn't willing to come out and say it. And the worst part, Emily's warning didn't seem like an isolated incident. It felt like someone was pulling the strings, controlling the narrative, trying to scare Sarah into submission. But why? Who would go to such lengths to shut her down? Just when Sarah thought she might have an answer, her phone rang again. It was an unknown number, but this time, it wasn't a voice on the other end. Instead, the call was silent, and then the unmistakable click of a door closing echoed through the receiver. And then, before she could react, a message popped up on her screen. It was from an anonymous email address. "You've been warned. Stay away from what you're searching for. This is your only warning." The blood drained from Sarah's face as she read the chilling message. Someone knew she was getting closer. Someone who didn't want her to uncover the truth. The walls were closing in, and every step she took only seemed to push her deeper into danger. Sarah didn't know who she could trust anymore. Was Daniel playing both sides? Was Emily trying to warn her from the inside? And why was someone trying so desperately to silence her? The only thing she knew for sure was that this was no longer just a corporate rivalry. There were forces at play here far more powerful and dangerous than she had ever imagined. And if she wasn't careful, the truth she sought might be the very thing that destroyed her. But Sarah wasn't about to back down now. She couldn't. The pieces were almost in place. She just had to survive long enough to put them together. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that someone was always watching, that the walls around her were slowly closing in. Every step she took, every new lead she followed, seemed to be met with new obstacles, new threats, and more confusion. But as the tension mounted, something unexpected happened, something that would complicate her already fragile understanding of what was going on. It started with a phone call. Late one evening, after Sarah had spent hours combing through old documents and files at the office, she received a message from her brother, Ethan. Ethan had always been her rock, the one person she could always count on. He was level-headed, logical, and his support had helped her weather countless storms in the past. But now, his voice on the other end of the line was shaking. "Sarah, I need to talk to you. It's important," he said, his words rushed, almost frantic. Confused and concerned, Sarah asked him what was going on. At first, Ethan hesitated, as though weighing whether or not to share whatever it was that was clearly weighing on him. "I don't know how to explain this, but I think I'm in danger too. Someone left a message for me." A chill ran down Sarah's spine as her mind raced. What did he mean? Who would want to target him? Ethan wasn't involved in her work, and as far as she knew, he had nothing to do with the corporate drama she'd been caught up in. But if they were coming after him too, then the stakes had just been raised. This wasn't just about her anymore. Someone, or something, was willing to target her entire family to keep the truth buried. Ethan continued, his voice now lower, as if he was afraid someone might be listening in. "I got an email this morning. It was from an anonymous address. It said something like, 'Stay away from Sarah, or you'll regret it.' That was all it said, but I know it's connected to what's going on with you. I don't know how, but it's not a coincidence." Sarah's mind began to spin. The message he received was eerily similar to the one she had gotten just days before, and it wasn't the first time she'd seen her family and friends dragged into this web of corporate warfare. The idea that someone was trying to manipulate her, to scare her into silence, was bad enough, but to involve Ethan, her own flesh and blood, was a level of cruelty she hadn't prepared for. Someone was playing a dangerous game, and Sarah was no longer just a player in it. She was the target. Before Sarah could respond, her brother added, "I don't want you to go any deeper into this, Sarah. It's not just your job at risk anymore. They're coming after everyone you care about. You need to back off." His words were filled with a mix of fear and protective urgency, but Sarah wasn't sure if she could take his advice. How could she stop now, when she was so close to uncovering the truth? The pieces were almost in place. She had to keep going. But the more she thought about it, the more she wondered whether Ethan's warning was another part of the puzzle. Was he truly trying to protect her, or was he being forced to deliver that message under duress? Could Ethan have been dragged into this without even realizing it? Had someone manipulated him too, just like they had manipulated her? As much as she wanted to trust him, a small voice in the back of her mind began to question everything, every word, every gesture, every piece of advice. The fear in his voice wasn't just for her safety. There was something else in his tone, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Sarah's thoughts were interrupted when her phone buzzed again. It was another email, but this time, it wasn't from the anonymous account that had previously threatened her. This time, it was from a new source. The subject line was simple: "The truth will come out soon enough." The message itself was even more cryptic than the first: "Don't trust anyone. Not even those who say they want to help. Keep digging, and you'll regret it." The weight of the words settled heavily on her chest. It was one thing for her to receive a threat, she'd expected that by now, but for someone else to be dragged into this, someone she cared about, someone who didn't have anything to do with the situation, was a new level of danger that she hadn't anticipated. And that's when the real realization hit her: she wasn't just up against a rival company anymore. She was in the middle of something far more sinister, something far more personal. But who was behind it all? Who was orchestrating this? The more Sarah thought about it, the more she realized that she didn't have any answers. Everyone around her seemed to have their own motives, their own agendas, and the deeper she dug, the more tangled the web became. Just when Sarah thought she might have a lead, the game shifted again. As she sat in her office late one night, going over old reports from her previous company, trying to piece together the timeline of her firing, she noticed something that completely contradicted everything she thought she knew. One of the reports, a document detailing her team's performance over the past year, included a list of recommendations for future staffing changes. Sarah had seen this document before, but this time, there was something different. A name had been circled, hers. It was marked with a note: "Immediate termination recommended." But here's the twist: the person who had made the note wasn't from her old company. The handwriting was unfamiliar. It didn't match anyone she'd seen involved in her termination. In fact, the name on the document was someone she didn't even recognize. This new piece of evidence didn't just add another layer of confusion to her already chaotic investigation, it changed everything. If this was part of the plan, then there was someone else involved. Someone Sarah hadn't even considered, someone who had been pulling strings behind the scenes from the start. Was this an inside job, or had someone planted the document to throw her off course? Was she being set up to fail from the beginning, manipulated by forces she didn't even know existed? The longer she stared at the paper, the more the world around her seemed to blur, as though she was falling deeper into a hole she couldn't escape. Sarah was no longer sure who she could trust. Could Daniel be the one behind this? Was he a part of the team working to destroy her career, or was he just another pawn? Was Emily's cryptic warning meant to protect her, or was it part of a bigger game? Ethan's sudden involvement had raised even more questions than it answered. Was he in danger because of her, or was he somehow connected to this plot in ways she couldn't understand? The deeper she dug, the more the lines between allies and enemies blurred. And the more Sarah realized that no one was who they appeared to be. As the days dragged on, the threats became more frequent, the mysteries more entangled, and Sarah found herself standing on the precipice of a terrifying truth she wasn't sure she was ready to face. But one thing was certain: whatever was happening, whoever was behind it, it wasn't going to end until she uncovered every last piece of the puzzle. The only question left was, would she survive long enough to see it through? The unease that had been building within Sarah for days finally reached a breaking point late one evening, a moment that would force her to confront the terrifying reality that she wasn't just tangled in a corporate rivalry, she was in the grip of something far darker, something far more dangerous. It started as a subtle shift, a feeling that something wasn't quite right. She'd been sitting in her apartment, reviewing the latest set of encrypted files, when she glanced out her window and noticed a car parked across the street. It was an ordinary sedan, nothing out of the ordinary at first, but the longer Sarah stared at it, the more it unsettled her. The car had been there for hours, unmoving, its headlights off, its engine silent. She tried to shake off the feeling, convincing herself it was just a coincidence, maybe someone waiting for a friend or taking a break. But as the evening wore on, something about it gnawed at her. At first, she dismissed it. After all, in a city like this, people parked on the street all the time, right? But the more she thought about it, the more certain she became that she had seen that same car several times before. It was subtle, barely noticeable in the busy urban backdrop, but each time she looked out, it was there. The same car, the same spot. She felt a cold chill crawl up her spine, and for the first time in days, a deep, gnawing sense of fear settled into her chest. Someone was watching her, and this time, she couldn't ignore it any longer. She'd been avoiding phone calls from Daniel for the past few days, too consumed with the mystery to deal with anything else, but when her phone rang again, she didn't hesitate to pick up. It was him. "Sarah," he said, his voice strangely tense, "I need you to listen to me. You're not safe. Not anymore. I don't know how much longer I can protect you, but you have to stop digging. You've crossed a line." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. It was the warning she had been dreading. But what did he mean by protect her? She didn't understand. The stakes were already high, but now it felt like she was sinking into something deeper than just a corporate scandal. Was Daniel truly trying to warn her, or was he playing a part in all of this? The ambiguity of his words only added to her confusion, and every passing moment felt like she was running out of time. The night grew heavier, and as Sarah struggled to make sense of everything, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being followed. It wasn't just the car across the street anymore, it was something more pervasive, more insidious. It was the way people in the coffee shop would glance at her, the way the clerk at the grocery store seemed to pause before handing her the change. A quiet unease was everywhere, like she was being shadowed by an unseen presence, but she couldn't pinpoint where it was coming from. And that, in itself, was the most terrifying part. Then, everything took a drastic turn. Early the next morning, Sarah received an unexpected call. It was from her brother Ethan. His voice, once steady and reassuring, now sounded frantic, panicked. "Sarah, I don't know what's happening," he said, his words almost a breathless whisper. "I went to the apartment to talk to you, but you weren't there. I called, but no one answered. I tried your office, no one has seen you there either. Where are you?" The sharp pang of panic shot through her as she tried to explain to him that she was at home, but when she glanced around the room, she froze. It wasn't just that her apartment felt wrong, it felt as though it had been disturbed. Her files were out of place. The papers she'd carefully sorted the night before were scattered across the floor. Her desk, once neat and organized, was now a chaotic mess. Sarah's hands trembled as she picked up the phone, a growing sense of dread pooling in her stomach. Ethan's voice was strained. "I don't know what's happening, Sarah, but this isn't just a coincidence. Something's going on, and it's not good. Be careful. Please, don't trust anyone." The last words sent a cold shiver down her spine. Don't trust anyone. That was the second time she'd heard that in just 24 hours. First from the anonymous email, now from Ethan. What was going on? Who had the power to manipulate her, to get to her brother without her knowing? And what did they want from her? Before Sarah could respond, there was a loud knock at the door. Her heart stopped. She hadn't heard anyone approaching, and there was no way anyone was supposed to be visiting at this hour. Her first instinct was to check the peephole. When she did, her breath caught in her throat. There was no one there. The hallway outside her apartment was empty, eerily still. It was as if the entire world had gone silent. She felt like a spider caught in a web, every sense heightened, every sound magnified in the quiet tension. Her hand trembled as she slowly stepped back from the door. What the hell was happening? Her mind raced, trying to piece together the events of the past few days, the cryptic messages, the warning from Daniel, the sudden appearance of the car, the strange email threats. And now this Ethan's urgent call, The unsettling knock on her door. She grabbed her phone again and tried to call Ethan back, but the call went straight to voicemail. Panic surged in her chest as she quickly shot him a text. "Ethan, where are you? Call me ASAP." The seconds stretched into an eternity. And then, as though on cue, her phone buzzed. The message was from her brother, but it wasn't a text. It was a video. Her hands shook as she tapped on the screen, and there, staring back at her in a grainy, distorted video, was Ethan. He was in his car, parked on a side street. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "they're watching me. They know where I am. I'm not safe. I tried to get out, but they're everywhere. Just please, don't trust anyone, and don't go looking for me. You have to stop. You're in danger too." The video cut off abruptly, leaving Sarah frozen in place, the message hanging in the air like a death sentence. Her heart pounded in her chest as she frantically checked the timestamp. The video had been sent just moments ago. But there was no sign of him. No way to track him. No way to know if he was still in his car, or if he'd even made it out alive. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. What had happened to her brother? What was he trying to tell her before the video cut off? In that moment, a brutal truth sank in. She wasn't just being followed anymore. She was in the middle of something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Whatever was going on, it wasn't just about her job or a corporate rivalry. It was about her life. And as she stood in her apartment, the cold dread in her bones, Sarah knew that if she didn't act fast, she might be next. The world around her felt like it was collapsing, and there was no one left she could trust. She was completely alone, caught in the web of a conspiracy she had barely begun to understand. The questions only grew, and with every passing moment, the danger intensified. The clock was ticking, and Sarah had no idea who would come for her next. Sarah's mind raced as she stared at her phone, trying to make sense of the twisted puzzle she had found herself in. Everything she had worked so hard to uncover, the corporate backstabbing, the threats, the shadowy figures watching her every move, suddenly felt like it was spiraling out of control. Every answer she thought she had uncovered only led to more questions, each more disturbing than the last. She had been so sure of one thing: she was fighting a war against a powerful rival company, a battle for her career, for her life. But as she stood in the middle of her disheveled apartment, holding her phone in trembling hands, the revelation hit her with a force that knocked the wind out of her. It was an innocuous text message that would turn everything upside down. No grand announcement, no flashing lights or dramatic scene, just a single, chilling line of text that would forever alter her understanding of what was happening. It wasn't from Daniel, or her brother, or even the anonymous accounts that had tormented her. It came from Emily, the one person she had trusted more than anyone in this entire mess. The message was simple: "I never wanted this to happen, but I had no choice." At first, Sarah couldn't make sense of it. What did Emily mean? She was the one person Sarah thought had been on her side. She had been there when Sarah needed support, listening patiently when she vented about the layoffs, the firings, the mysterious threats. Emily had seemed like a friend, someone who understood the weight of what Sarah was going through. But now, the words on the screen felt like a betrayal, like everything Sarah thought she knew about the situation was a lie. Her hands shook as she quickly dialed Emily's number, but it went straight to voicemail. This wasn't the first time she'd tried to reach her, but it felt different now. The pit in Sarah's stomach deepened. What had Emily meant by that message? Was this a confession, an apology, or was there more to it? What if Emily had been playing her this whole time? The thought was nearly unbearable, but Sarah couldn't ignore the growing suspicion gnawing at her. As if in response to the rising tension, the door to her apartment suddenly creaked open. The feeling of someone being in the room with her, an unseen presence lurking just outside her line of sight, sent a jolt of adrenaline through her body. Her pulse raced as she whirled around, but no one was there. Nothing out of the ordinary. Yet, the sensation that something was wrong, that she was being watched, intensified. She tried to steady her breath and focus, but her mind was still trapped on Emily's message. It seemed so out of place, so full of weight, and yet it left her with more uncertainty than clarity. As if the universe had conspired to make her question everything she thought she knew, The next few minutes would feel like a cruel twist of fate. Without thinking, Sarah grabbed the stack of papers on her desk, the reports, the emails, the cryptic messages, and started rifling through them in a frantic attempt to find something, anything, that might explain what was happening. She'd already combed through these documents 100 times, but this time, something caught her eye. One of the reports that had always seemed so insignificant before, one that she had barely glanced at, now seemed different. The name at the top of the page was familiar, too familiar. It was Emily's name. But not just Emily. It was her name, written as part of a contract, signed off by someone in her old company, the very one that had fired Sarah. The contract wasn't just about business, it was about something else, something deeply personal. Emily had been involved in the deal. She had signed it. She had known about it from the very beginning. It hit Sarah like a slap to the face. Emily hadn't just been an innocent bystander. She had been part of the plan all along. The same plan that had led to Sarah's termination, to the threats, to the constant harassment. Emily had been playing both sides, using Sarah's trust as a pawn in a much larger game. But why? Why hadn't Emily said anything? Why had she pretended to be on her side? The answer seemed to elude her, slipping just beyond her reach, like a shadow in the corner of her vision that she could never quite catch. The air in the apartment felt thick, suffocating, as the realization began to sink in. What if the entire conspiracy she had been chasing wasn't about corporate rivalry at all? What if it was about something much more personal, something hidden in the shadows of her past? Was Emily working for the same people who had been threatening her, or was she simply a pawn, just like Sarah? The questions piled on top of each other, an avalanche of uncertainty that threatened to crush her. Just as she was about to lose herself in the chaos of her thoughts, Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. The text was short, but it froze Sarah in her tracks. "It's not just about your job, Sarah. They never wanted you to find out." Her heart skipped a beat. The words stung like a dagger to the chest, but they also gave her a chilling clarity. Whoever was behind this wasn't just after her career. They were after something bigger, something she had yet to uncover. And now, with the sudden appearance of Emily's betrayal, the pieces were starting to fall into place in ways she couldn't have predicted. Sarah had been living in a world where nothing was as it seemed, where friends were enemies, and the people she trusted most had hidden agendas of their own. But then, the unthinkable happened. As Sarah was processing the weight of Emily's involvement, her phone buzzed again, this time with a notification from a secure email account she'd set up to track anything suspicious. She opened it hesitantly, and her eyes widened at the message. There, attached to the email, was a document, one she had never seen before. The title of the document made Sarah's blood run cold: Project Phoenix, Operation Sarah. In that moment, the entire world around Sarah seemed to shatter. She wasn't just caught in the middle of a corporate war, she had been the target of something far darker, far more methodical, than she had ever imagined. Project Phoenix was a covert operation, an operation that had been specifically designed to monitor her, to manipulate her, and to use her for a purpose she couldn't yet comprehend. The people involved weren't just corporate rivals. They were playing a much larger game, one that Sarah had only just begun to understand. But the question that burned in her mind, more than anything else, was this: why her? Why had she been chosen for this? What was it that made her so important? As she looked at the document, her thoughts began to swirl into a chaotic fog of dread and confusion. Whoever was behind this had planned everything meticulously, and now, with Emily's betrayal hanging over her like a dark cloud, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was a pawn in a game with no rules, no mercy, and no way out. The truth was slipping further from her grasp with every new twist, every new revelation. The only thing she knew for sure now was that she was playing a dangerous game. And in this game, no one was safe, not even her. Sarah couldn't breathe. The weight of everything pressing down on her: Emily's betrayal, the chilling discovery about Project Phoenix, the constant fear that someone was always watching her, was becoming too much to bear. She had always believed she could handle the truth, that she could piece together the puzzle, that she could trust her instincts. But now, as she stood alone in her apartment with the weight of the documents in her hands and the haunting images of her brother's final message still burned into her memory, Sarah realized that the truth might not be worth finding after all. The stakes had escalated, and the choices in front of her felt impossible. Her phone buzzed again, the sudden noise a jolt to her already frazzled nerves. A single notification. "Daniel, meet me. I have answers. I don't know how much longer I can protect you." The message was short, but it felt like a ticking clock, the seconds slipping away. Daniel had always been there, a friend in the midst of this nightmare, someone who knew more than he had let on. But now, every word he said felt like a new piece to a dangerous game, one where Sarah didn't know if she was the pawn or the queen. She knew she had to meet him. But could she trust him? Could she trust anyone anymore? The choices were overwhelming. Sarah had always prided herself on being able to think logically, to compartmentalize her emotions and focus on what was important. But now, all of her certainty was crumbling. The moment she set foot outside her apartment, she could be walking into the jaws of a trap. There were too many unknowns, too many unanswered questions, and worse, there was no one left she could truly rely on. Her brother was missing, her closest friend was an enemy, and the man who had always been there for her might have been playing her all along. A new text message from Emily appeared on her phone, and this time, it was even more cryptic. "You don't understand. They've been controlling everything. Even me. It's too late to stop it." The words burned through her, sharp and cold. Emily had always been a confidant, someone Sarah had trusted when the pressure became too much, but now, the truth about Emily's involvement in everything twisted into something that felt like a betrayal so deep, Sarah wasn't sure how to process it. How had Emily been controlled? Had she been a victim too, or had she been lying to Sarah from the start? And yet, the message came with an urgency Sarah couldn't ignore. If Emily had been manipulated, if she had been caught in something far bigger than they both realized, it meant Sarah was in deeper danger than she thought. But if that was true, how far would Emily go to protect herself, to protect the secrets she was keeping? And how could Sarah trust her now? The line between ally and enemy was no longer clear, and Sarah felt herself slipping further into a world where everyone had their own agenda. But it wasn't just Emily she had to worry about anymore. The realization that Daniel had been part of the puzzle, that his warnings and vague answers were more than just protective gestures, started to gnaw at her. He had told her so many things, things that didn't add up, things that felt off, as if he was hiding something. His message had sounded like a lifeline, but now it felt more like a trap, a final push toward something Sarah was too afraid to face. If Daniel was a part of this, if he had known more than he had ever let on, what did that mean for her? What was he really trying to protect her from, and why hadn't he told her the truth before? The ultimate question was becoming clearer and clearer as the days passed. What did Sarah value more, her safety, or the truth? She could go to Daniel, confront him, and demand the answers she had been so desperate for. But if she did, would she be walking straight into their hands, allowing them to complete whatever sick, twisted plan they had designed for her? The thought of Daniel knowing the truth, playing a role in her downfall, made her sick. But the alternative, to stay hidden, to keep running, to let whatever this was destroy her without fighting back, felt like death in slow motion. Then there was the matter of her brother. She hadn't heard from him in days, and the last message he'd sent her, the one that had been so frantic, so filled with terror, had left her questioning everything. Was he still alive? Was he being held captive, or was he simply out there, somewhere, desperately trying to protect her from the very people who were trying to destroy her? She had to find him. But at what cost? How could she expose the truth and risk losing the only family she had left? Her mind reeled with the consequences of every decision. There was no right choice, no clear path forward. It was as if every door she opened led to another trap. She could try to save her brother, but if she did, she might be walking straight into the hands of those who had orchestrated the entire thing. She could confront Daniel, demand answers, but that could push him into a corner where he would have no choice but to betray her completely. Or, worst of all, she could keep running, burying herself deeper in lies and half-truths, never truly knowing who she could trust until it was too late. The weight of it all was suffocating. She had never been afraid of the truth before, but now, she couldn't help but wonder if she was better off living in ignorance. Every piece of the puzzle had led her to a point where nothing was what it seemed. People she thought she knew had hidden their motives. The ones who claimed to protect her had been part of the plan all along. No one was safe, And Sarah was more alone than ever. If she made the wrong move, everything would fall apart. As Sarah stood at the precipice, caught between these impossible choices, she realized that no matter what she chose, she would never be the same again. The answers were out there, but so was the danger lurking in the shadows, waiting for her to make her move. And in that moment, the most terrifying thought crossed her mind: perhaps she had already lost. Perhaps there was no escape from the game that had been set in motion, and the choices she faced were nothing more than a final illusion before the inevitable conclusion. The truth was slipping further from her grasp with every passing moment, and Sarah had no idea who she could turn to, or if anyone could be trusted. Every step she took seemed to lead her deeper into a web of lies, manipulation, and betrayal, with the real culprits just out of reach, watching her every move. She had to choose, the truth or her life. But could she even survive either path? The world felt like it was collapsing in on Sarah, piece by piece. Everything she thought she understood, the enemies, the allies, the motives, the hidden messages, all of it was falling apart. What she thought was a corporate rivalry, a series of manipulations aimed at destroying her, was nothing more than a small piece in a far bigger, far darker puzzle. Each revelation brought new, terrifying questions, and the answers she was seeking felt further out of reach with every passing second. The conspiracy she had stumbled into wasn't just about her job, her life, or even her family, it was much bigger than that. And she was right in the middle of it, unknowingly playing the most dangerous game imaginable. The moment Sarah read the message from her brother, "They know everything. They're watching you." In that moment, Sarah realized the full scale of the conspiracy. She wasn't just a pawn in a corporate game. She wasn't just a casualty of a battle for power. This was bigger than anything she could have ever imagined, too deep, too well orchestrated, and too powerful to escape. She had been dragged into a machine that had been running for years, and now, it was ready to finish what it had started. The walls closed in around her, and Sarah knew that the only thing left to do was fight for her life. But at what cost? The room felt like it was closing in around Sarah. Her heart pounded in her chest, the seconds stretching out in agonizing slowness. The men who had entered her apartment stood at the door, their eyes cold, unfeeling, like they were more robots than human beings. They weren't here to negotiate. They weren't here to make deals. This was the endgame. And Sarah was trapped in it, fighting to the last breath, her hands trembling as she tried to make sense of the chaos swirling in her mind. The man in the front, the one who had spoken earlier, took a step forward. His face was perfectly composed, the kind of expression that suggested he was used to control, to power. "Sarah," he said, his voice calm, almost soothing, "you don't understand the magnitude of what you've uncovered. This isn't just about you. It's bigger than your little job, your little life. You were never supposed to know this much. You were never supposed to dig this deep." Sarah's mind raced as she tried to make sense of everything. They had been manipulating her from the start. Her job, her brother's disappearance, Emily's betrayal, Daniel's vague warnings, it all made sense now, but it still felt like pieces of a puzzle were missing. She had followed the trail, desperate for answers, and now, standing face to face with the orchestrators of her downfall, she was finally starting to see the entire picture. "You were all part of it, weren't you?" Sarah spat out, her voice sharp with anger. "The lies, the games, the manipulation. It was all planned. It's been a setup from the beginning." The man nodded slightly, as though this was just a matter of fact. "Exactly. You were a tool, Sarah. A means to an end. And now, we're closing the chapter. You should be grateful you made it this far. Most people don't." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Gratitude? Was this man really suggesting she should be thankful for everything they had put her through? For the fear, the uncertainty, the endless nights of searching for answers that only led to more questions? She had been pushed to the brink of her sanity, but she wasn't going to let them see her break. Not now. Not when she was so close to uncovering everything. "You think I'm afraid of you," she shot back, her voice filled with defiance. "I'm not. And I'm not going to let you control me anymore." The man's lips twitched into a smile, but there was no warmth in it, only cold calculation. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small flash drive, tossing it onto the table in front of Sarah. "This is everything. The truth. All the answers you've been looking for are on here. But here's the catch: if you take it, if you keep digging, you won't survive the next step. We have eyes everywhere. You can't fight this. Sarah stared at the flash drive, the weight of it pressing down on her like a 1,000-pound burden. This was it. The final piece. The answers were within her reach. But it was a trap. She knew it. They weren't offering her the truth to set her free, they were giving it to her to finish what they started. They wanted her to fall into their hands, to follow their rules, to bend to their will. For a moment, the world felt still, like everything was frozen in time. The man was waiting, expecting her to take the bait, to surrender. But Sarah's mind was racing, her instincts screaming at her to make a choice. To walk away from the fight, to leave it all behind, or to take the risk and face whatever consequences came next. There was no easy way out. No clean escape. This was the moment when everything would either break wide open, or when she would vanish into the darkness. Without thinking, Sarah reached for the flash drive. She knew the consequences. She knew the danger. But in that split second, something inside her snapped. She had come too far to turn back now. The truth, whatever it was worth the fight. She wasn't going to be a pawn in their game anymore. As her fingers closed around the drive, the man's expression hardened. "You're making a grave mistake," he said, his voice low, filled with warning. Before Sarah could even respond, the door slammed open behind her with such force that the entire apartment seemed to shake. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed in the hallway, followed by the harsh, panicked shout of someone she knew all too well. "Sarah, get down." Daniel's voice rang out, frantic and desperate. In that moment, everything happened at once. Daniel rushed forward, his body blocking the door as gunshots rang out, shattering the glass of the windows and sending splinters flying through the room. Sarah's pulse raced as she hit the floor, the sound of her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She looked up just in time to see the man at the door reaching for something that gleamed in the dim light: a gun. It was all happening too fast. Daniel moved with surprising speed, pulling Sarah into a crouch and shielding her with his body. "Get out of here," he shouted, his voice strained with urgency. "Now. This is the only chance you have." Before Sarah could respond, she felt a sharp tug on her arm, and the world exploded into chaos. The sound of more shots, the crashing of furniture, the scramble for safety, it all became a blur as she was yanked toward the door. She didn't know how she had managed to get outside, how she had survived the onslaught, but somehow, she was running. The air was thick with tension, and every step felt like it might be her last. She glanced behind her, her mind reeling from the mess of contradictions. Daniel, the man who had warned her, who had stood by her through it all, was now running beside her, but something wasn't right. His urgency, his fear, it wasn't enough to explain everything that had just unfolded. The man who had attacked them, the one with the gun, it was clear now that they had all been part of a much bigger plan, one that involved more than just Sarah. As they rounded the corner, a new realization hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. The truth she had fought so hard to uncover, the answers she thought were hidden in that flash drive, were no longer the most important thing. It wasn't just about her anymore. It wasn't about the company, the betrayal, or even her brother. The conspiracy was far more insidious than she had ever imagined, and the people behind it weren't just pulling strings, they were manipulating entire systems, using their reach to control the very fabric of society itself. In the midst of the chaos, the pieces fell into place. The betrayal she had experienced was just a small part of the puzzle. The true scale of the conspiracy had yet to fully unfold, and now, it was clear that Sarah was just a pawn in a much larger game. The flash drive wasn't going to give her answers, it was just another trap. The real enemy wasn't a person, it was an entire system built to control and manipulate every aspect of her life. And just as Sarah thought she had a handle on the truth, a voice echoed in her ear, cold and familiar: "You still don't understand, do you?" The world was quiet now. The chaos, the violence, the fear, it all seemed like a distant memory, fading into the background as Sarah stood alone on the rooftop, watching the city below. She had come through it all: betrayals, threats, dead ends, and yet, somehow, she had made it out alive. The weight of everything that had happened pressed on her, but there was a strange sense of calm within her. She had found some answers, but not all of them. The truth, as it turned out, was far more complex than she could have ever imagined. The conspiracy, the web of manipulation and control, it was still out there, and it was still moving, still twisting behind the scenes. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah didn't feel entirely trapped. The flash drive, the evidence she thought would give her the answers she needed, had been a dead end, another part of their game to keep her distracted. The real key to everything was never meant to be found on a file, it was within her own understanding of the situation, the realization that she had been manipulated at every turn. But it wasn't just about being a pawn. She had power now. Not in the traditional sense, but in the ability to see through the lies, to understand the game that had been played on her and countless others. She wasn't going to play by their rules anymore. Sarah had decided to make her own path forward, to live life on her terms. But that didn't mean she could forget everything that had happened. The moment she thought she had broken free, she received another message, another clue that hinted at something even bigger than what she had just uncovered. It was a reminder that the fight wasn't over. The system, the people behind it, were still out there, operating in the shadows, waiting for the next opportunity to pull the strings again. She had thought she was out, but now she understood, there was no way out of this system. Not fully. No one could walk away from something so pervasive. The game didn't stop just because she wanted it to. But that was okay. Sarah didn't need to escape anymore. She wasn't looking for a peaceful resolution, not now. She had learned to embrace the uncertainty, the chaos. She wasn't running anymore. She was ready to take them on, no matter what it took. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in an orange glow, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had lost a lot, her family, her job, her innocence. But she had gained something far more important, the truth, her own resilience, and the understanding that nothing was ever truly as it seemed. The system might have been too big to take down in one blow, but Sarah wasn't one to give up easily. She had made it this far, and she would keep going. She wasn't going to be a victim anymore. She was going to be the one to expose the truth, to fight back, to break the cycle. But as she turned away from the edge of the building and walked back inside, the final piece of the puzzle slipped into place in her mind, one last, unexpected twist that made her stop in her tracks. The person who had been behind it all, the one who had manipulated her from the very beginning, wasn't just some faceless corporate mastermind. No. It was someone she had trusted completely, someone she had never expected. It was Emily. Her closest ally. Her best friend. The one person who had always been there, or so Sarah had thought. The realization hit her like a thunderclap. Emily had been orchestrating everything, pulling the strings from the very start, hiding in plain sight. The betrayal cut deeper than anything she had experienced before, but it also made sense. Emily had always been too perfect, too helpful, too eager to cover for Sarah's mistakes, always pushing her in the right direction when it felt like everything was falling apart. And now, Sarah understood why. Emily wasn't just her friend. She was part of the system, part of the very network that had been using Sarah all along. The betrayal ran deeper than Sarah had ever imagined. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The game was still on, and Sarah had just unlocked the final level. She wasn't going to let Emily, or anyone else, get away with it. The power was in her hands now, and she was ready to play by her own rules. As Sarah stepped into the elevator, ready to face whatever came next, the lingering question remained, would she be able to expose the truth, to take down the system that had ruined her life, or was she already too far gone, trapped in a game that had no winners? The door to the elevator closed with a soft thud, and Sarah took a deep breath, ready to face whatever awaited her next. The fight was just beginning, and she was ready. The final twist of the story wasn't about closure. It wasn't about answers. It was about the uncertainty that remained, the questions that would never be fully answered. Because in the end, sometimes the biggest mystery of all is what happens after the story is over. And Sarah, in her newfound understanding, knew one thing for sure, the game never truly ends. It just changes players.